material, but we will be recording it. But this won't be made public.
Nature of the topic and people's safety, but we are recording it so that you know that. So, bienvenidos, bienvenidas todos y todes. Es un gran placer.
So welcome. It's a great pleasure to have a lot of people here with us, especially our guests from El Salvador who are here with us today to share.
It's really wonderful to have everyone here. So thrilled to see so many people, and especially thrilled that our Salvadorian guests are here. So this will be will be done in Spanish with interpretation. So if you are not bilingual, please click on the globe in the lower right part of your thing and press on the language that you would like to listen in. So press on English if you do not speak Spanish. Este programa vamos a hacerlo español y queremos tener justicia de lenguaje. Entonces, si
So
no
the presentation will be in Spanish, and we want to have language justice. If someone for some reason does not speak English, you may choose Spanish. Spanish will be the main language, but there could be English questions at the end.
Able to, if you are not bilingual, to click on the language that you would like to listen in, and then we will do a small test. I'm going to have I want to welcome Diego Pons, who is our interpreter from the language co-op, who is here to ensure that people can speak in the language of their heart. Quiero introducir a Diego Pons, que está aquí de la cooperativa de idiomas, para que gente.
So Diego's here from the Language Justice Co-op, just to let people speak in the language of their heart. So testing, English channel, testing.
Looks like that's working. Ahora, if anyone is not hearing the English interpretation, si alguien no está escuchando la interpretación, por favor ponga una nota.
Please,
Please give us a little note. Okay, now let's have Diego. Diego will do in the Spanish channel. Diego, ¿puedes hacerlo en el de español? Okay, estoy escuchando de Pablo Ruiz desde Santiago de Chile, que está escuchando bien la interpretación. Qué bueno, qué bueno. Okay.
There's some Pablo from Santiago, Chile. Lets us know that we can hear the interpretation. So let's get started. So once again, I'm Gabriela Flora from the Conference Service Committee, and it's a great pleasure being here with you all. First of all, I wish to introduce our sponsors from the Coalition Interreligious and Companionship from the north of Colorado, which are here co-sponsoring, so I would say, this really important event. RP, I don't know if you want to say something.
Hola a todos, es un gusto estar aquí.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure being here. We've been following and keeping up with the situation in Salvador. It's an honor to be able to hear from the people who are directly there. So we're here with several representatives from the churches in Fort Collins, and we're here to learn. So thank you for including us. Do you want to share one or two phrases about what it is that you do so that the people in El Salvador can understand the type of work that you guys do? Of course, we're a coalition from both churches and communities of faith, as well as organizations from the community. We're here trying to educate our people, especially our allies here in Colorado. Well, I'm currently located in California, but in Colorado. So what's happening? Why is it that people are leaving their homes and their country of origin? So that's part of our work. We're also helping people who need to flee and to leave their country here in Colorado. So we have several programs to help out with our legal cases. in crisis. So this is an opportunity to learn, to understand the roots of the immigration issue, and also help us organize ourselves here in the United States. Thank you, RP. We're really happy to have you co-sponsoring us. Our other sponsor is the Committee of Peace and Justice in Denver. So I want to introduce Rebecca Hamlin, who can share a bit about some of the important work that they've been doing for several years. So thank you, Gabriela. Colleagues, welcome. We're very proud to have you all here this afternoon to be able to share with the Committee of Peace and Justice, who's been working for over 20 years in the solidarity work with Latin American towns, particularly those Central American countries. Here in our public, we have colleagues who are founders from the organization, which is, they're here with us this afternoon. We want to express our permanent solidarity with all of the people, residents of El Salvador, and for the entire fight that you're doing to continue defending the achievements that were made and
avances de nuestros pueblos centroamericanos. Muchas gracias y bienvenidas.
So thank you and welcome. Thank you, Rebecca. So we can hear our children in the background. So we know that our children are inspired to hear right from our work. So once again, I'm Gabriela Flora with the Committee for Service from the Committee of Americans. We're an organization that's existed for over 100 years. Here in the Denver office, we work with issues related to migrants. The AFSC does have quite a lengthy history of working as well in Central America. We know that the history of violence in the countries such as El Salvador, the United States does have a key part and very sad and sad part of sponsoring and defending governments who were massacring their people and training individuals who perpetrated these crimes. So this is not a separated history from the United States. We also know that since the 80s and prior to that, a lot of people from Central America were arriving here. Now that violence has increased even more and it's been coming to the United States. We know that the politics in the United States, such as Title 42, are not allowing people to enter within the international laws. So I wish to pass the word over to Kathy Bougher, who's a member from Committee of Allies from Americans. She's been working for several years in El Salvador, and she has helped out to organize this talk that's quite important. So Kathy, thank you so much. And I pass the space over to you. Kathy, it looks like you may have, your screen may have frozen. Can you hear us? Because we can't hear you. Maybe you need to turn off your camera because it's frozen. Okay, we can see you now, Kathy. Can you speak, Kathy? Okay, you're on mute. Okay, Alejandra and I are here. Yes, Gabriela and I are here on this same computer. It's been a bit complicated. Okay, thank you. Okay, once again, welcome everyone who's participating, particularly all of the people here from El Salvador who are taking time out of their days and lending us their expertise, and also taking certain risks, right, and speaking about these topics that are very delicate, but they're quite important, right, for us, all of us who are from the United States and who have a great history of intervening, not so positive interventions in this part of the world. And we have the responsibility of knowing, right, history and understanding what's happening at this moment. So I'll pass the word over to my dear friend and colleague in this fight, Alejandra Burgos, who's a defendant of human rights, feminist human rights for several years. She's been involved in a great deal of issues here in Latin America. So I'll pass over the word to her and she'll present several other individuals as well from El Salvador.
Cristosal, que es una organización muy, muy
Cristosal, which is a very prestigious human rights organization. Joana Ramirez from Social Services Pasionistas. I don't know if she's arrived yet, Joanna, but
Alejandra.
so I pass it over to Alejandra now.
Gracias,
Yes,
Kathy.
hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Gabriela, Jordan, and as well as my other colleagues from the Center of Justice in the part of Denver who's been organizing this event. When we speak with Kathy about the importance of having this this talk, we thought that it was really important to have this space where colleagues such as Zaida Nava, who represents one of the organizations that in the current context is working in accompanying victims from the violations of human rights, which are being committed right by the state in a context and in a historic moment in which we thought that we would not be facing these issues. So in this mark, right, in this democratic process, in this marker of restrictions for the defense of human rights, we thought that it was important that colleagues such as Zaida Navas and such as Joana Ramirez from Social Service Pasionistas, which is another organization that's doing that amazing work in accompanying and supporting victims from human rights abuses, right, that they'll be accompanying us. Like Kathy mentioned, we're colleagues right in this fight for several times now. Kathy's a Solidarity colleague, feminist who has a very international heart. And for several years, she's been accompanying us in several different fights. And she's been lending her volunteer services. And we're currently here together in El Salvador. And while the work that I do in the Feminist Coalition has to do right with the accompanying and women defending human rights in the current context, which is effectively, those are the people who are also facing lots of consequences in the mark of their daily work due to all the things that are happening right in this territorial areas, especially with all of these restrictive marks and these human rights issues. So with that, I pass the word over to Zaida Navas, and thank you so much, Zaida, for joining us. And it's quite important to take the voice right in these spaces, especially with individuals who are looking from outside, and lots of the information that we do know that pollute our ideas and our ways of thinking, and that has to do a lot with the hegemonic discourse from the El Salvadorian state. So due to that hegemonic speech, we're going to be telling a bit we're going to be counting with Zaida's intervention to speak a bit about the issue of human rights in El Salvador. And with Kathy, we thought, what name should we give this conversation? Well, this is a dialogue from a perspective of human rights about the current situation in El Salvador. And it's a critical perspective, urgent and necessary in the current context. So go ahead, Zaida. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm truly happy and emotional to be able to speak with all of you today, recognizing the international solidarity since several years for El Salvador, the support that you give our patriots, our women, our men, the entire El Salvadorian population, and the people who emigrate from this country seeking the American dream, including fleeing from violence that exists in El Salvador. So I greatly thank you for this forum, this space, so that we can talk. Just let me know how much time we have, because if not, we can spend all night here together. So just let me know. Perhaps in the chat, you can let me know how much time is left. So perhaps let's give a brief context about the current situation that we find ourselves in. I know that several of you are already aware of the El Salvador's reality, but I'm just going to give a context. So let's remember that after the war in El Salvador, these scenarios were presented of violence or state response via violent means, and an institutionality was created. Supposedly it was a democratic one, and it was agreed, right, to elevate the military for the public self-defense, right? But after the war, organized crime and vandalism, they started developing in El Salvador. It's a phenomenon that all of us know are the phenomenons, right, of human gangs, pandillas, which is a culturalization, and that it also installs itself in a country with great deficits, with great structural problems, economical issues, social issues, discrimination, inequalities, etc., and which gave the conditions for these structures to develop. And if on top of that, if we add the responses that the different governments provided when the phenomenon of the gangs started to surge there around the decade of the 90s, even though at that moment we were not speaking or talking about structures that were developing crime, right? Crimes. In some cases, right, there were young men who were generating certain levels of violences, which did not go beyond, right, of vandalism, stealing, or even harming, right, within the same groups. But the responses that those governments provided were referring, right, to about the year 1996, where the first law was created, declaring that there were illegal groups that were formed that afterwards were declared unconstitutional until the year 2001, which is where those mano dura plans were launched, right, in El Salvador, first by President Francisco Flores, who afterwards was processed, right? He was charged, and this onboarding has been right from the criminalization, and this has not been an onboarding right from a social and structural means from the key features, right, of these structures and from the communities in which they were being developed. It began right receiving right individuals, adolescents and youth, and stigmatizing and labeling those communities where not only were they living in, but also the ones where in which they were these groups were taking charge of. So this response, this repressive response from the Salvador state started to generate greater hardship, right, in these laws. In 1998, El Salvador assumed a legislation for penalty quite progressive, which recognized and guaranteed human rights. And the human rights vary on the center, right, of this penalty legislation. However, after the approval of this penalty legislation, laws started being approved and reforming the same penalty code in order to be every time more coercive, in order to utilize the legislation as a means of response in front of the phenomenon, which were independently social. So violence started to develop in several different ways: delinquency violence, gender violence, or violence based on gender, and gangs strengthened instead of being weakened by these hard hand politics. First, this was implemented by President Francisco Flores, afterwards by President Antonio Sacas with his plan Mano Dura. In 2009, when the government Mauricio Funes starts, a different response gets inserted right by a public response. However, the different pressures from different sectors of the national life, because the violent situation and the murders in Salvador has been something constant. The being of these structures, which passed from being groups of individuals who were committing certain crimes, certain violent crimes, and they started to become, really these structural crimes. By 2009, these structures had control, right, of several territories and regions in the area, permeated in the communities and committing crimes already vinculated, right, with the organized crime. and structures from other countries as well, including the Zetas in Mexico. Immediately afterwards, this general pressure that was generated from within the economical power, from the hope and expectations that was generated for the community of El Salvador from this change of government, and in front of this diminution of these home crimes, these murder crimes that were progressing quite slowly. So we're referring right to in 2009, we had the country was experiencing approximately 3 daily murders, and in 2011, this had reduced to 10. This was not enough for the population of El Salvador. So these and other factors resulted in the president doing a complete turn right in social protection and putting right the military in front of these issues, and to give this turn with this this negotiation right in between the gangs. This produced this first reduction in homicides in this very extreme way, right, without a technical response. The same government started right to recognize afterwards in these newspaper right interviews that they had come to an agreement, or let's say a truce between the gangs that was facilitated by the government. Once the president Sanchez government comes in, this logic, this truce of the gangs breaks up, and this continues to escalate. The homicides to the level in which they reach to approximately 30 daily homicides sometimes. 2015 was the year with the greatest amount of homicides. They've announced that certain functionaries from that government also tried to do negotiations. However, the method for excellence that the previous government utilized was the use of extraordinary measures, which means measures of repressions in jails and means repercussions right through the use of force. So once again, right, this modality of mano dura. However, these exercises that the government has given, this was also working in the Plan Seguro, which was an effort by the country, which had a great investment and great support by the international community for the development for different programs to prevent violence, specifically in several municipalities. A reduction was observed, a reduction of homicides was observed when the new president comes in, President Bukele, in 2019. There was an entire previous campaign for the preparation of this government in order to reach to the government, which was facilitated by the wearing down of these traditional parties, Elena and Elena, who were first two in powers, due to the mediatic pressure, which means right, great campaigns of publicity, and also due to the expectations on the El Salvadorian population to receive changes, sick and tired of corruption and of these crimes, and also waiting for immediate responses. This individual, who is now the president of the republic, along with their publicity team, because he does have this great publicity team, and they designed this entire strategy of translating to people. They knew how to listen, what was the citizenship demand, and their speech turned into blaming the past. And due to that, they're called, or they refer to themselves as a party without an ideology, right? This party of new ideas. However, this is a party that's been formed, and it is formed by individuals who come both from the left and from the right, the parties of the left and the right. And the same president, he being someone who's being a businessman, he aligns, he affiliates to a party on the left, but he never leaves his characteristics, right, of being an individual, of emerging capitalism, right, shall we say, for a nation like El Salvador. So the presidency is one, and the elections and the legislative body are one, specifically because there's this entire construction of this messaging via this whole narrative of everything that's behind, the left and the right being the same, we are something different. We reject that, and due to that, that's why we're able to do something differently, even though the reality may not be true. And we're going to do things that are completely different, right? So this entire messaging, right, which encompasses the entire Salvador population, right? Because there's the media communications, right? The televisions, right? They utilize this, and also the government creates and funds their own means of communications, and it also inserts themselves in the middle of international communications. So I give this context in order to be able to explain the current situation that we're facing at this moment. So at this moment, the government offers the El Salvadorian population to resolve all of those issues of insecurity, of violence, and it offers, it even offers the community right, diversity, the LGBTQ community. It offers right to resolve what was previously never resolved. And every time the population continues to realize that this is not true. But in terms of security, the government constructs this different narrative. And however, there are elements which can give us with light to see if this is true or not, to see what's actually going on. So first of all, a few days after assuming power right in the government and the end of June of 2019, there's a sudden drop right in homicides. The government decides lives with 12 daily homicides at that moment, and by the end of July, we had 4 daily homicides. This abrupt decrease can only be explained through phenomena such as what include right 2012, 2013 with the previous president, which is the truce right between the gangs. So we had the beginnings right of these truces between the gangs. So after that, right, the government announces this territory plan, which is a plan which we still do not know of its context. And they gave this public presentation, this PowerPoint, in which they announced right four initial phases. The first was to control the regions. The second was to work in the prevention of violence. The third was to strengthen the institutional power and to provide resources to the institutions. They announced that this was the result, right, of the plan for this diminishing these things sustained during the last 2.5 years. So someone's making background noise. Can you please mute yourself if you? Okay, let's continue. So I was saying, the first 2.5 years of President Pequeños, right? What we have is the mediatic announcement that the plan for this territory plan was working. Every time more power was starting to be given, and more control, more exercises, and more functions, and more visibility, public visibility, right, to the military. That thing that we left in 1992 with the signatures right of the peace agreements via the military, this is returned by this president, not just to this mediatic, by giving more resources, more budgets, and more military efforts. At the start of this year, the president announces, that he will be naming more than 40,000 military officers and 5,000 military officers in the next few years. This returns right to giving the public safety measures over to the military. So besides that, there are events, serious events on the right side, right, of the democratic part of Salvador in these last 2.5 years. The first is on February 9th of 2020, when the Legislative Assembly, the previous assembly, right, from the previous parties, they determined that they would not be giving out a loan to the president in order to cover debt and to strengthen, right, the police and the military. So the president takes the General Assembly, and launches this messaging from the General Assembly stating that practically the General Assembly was not taken because they did not want to, and God was willing to have that. So it's important to mention that this messaging and this behavior from the president is quite similar to the behavior of previous leaders or other individuals in neighbor countries from Latin America. So they have a lot of the same characteristics from these dictatorships. So we say, right, an individual who has this prophetic role, who is the chosen one and who makes decisions on behalf of the public and who's good with all of the individuals. So after that, in May of 2021, when they went in the General Assembly, they remove unconstitutionally the constitutional side, which had been a counterweight for the executives during the quarantine from the pandemic in 2020, where there were detentions, arbitrary detentions, specifically because the mode of governing by this president is an authoritarian one, right? He also applied this exception regime, not with characteristics similar to this one, but where there were detentions as well. So in May of 2021, they removed, right, the Hall of the Constitutionally and the General Assembly of the Republic. And from there on out, the current government has had control of the General Assembly from the Supreme Court Justice, from the General Fiscal of the Republic. And in September of 2021, they also eliminate an important amount of judges, and they name judges fitting the profile of what the president wanted to have. So then they start to announce and to accuse and to persecute Democratic judges. So this is the forefront of what we're seeing at this moment. In March, between the 25th and 27th of March of this year, so about 3 months ago, a rupture is produced between those negotiations that the government had with those gangs, because we have this weekend with 87 homicides. The first day had over 14 homicides, the second day had 35, until eventually reaching 87. So that 27th of March, the General Legislative Assembly states, right, this reception, and then they allow, right, they violate, right, the correspondency, meaning that they allow for the government to do interventions from telephones on any type of correspondency. They amplify the space for the provisional detention, even more than 72 hours, right, 3 days. They increase that up to 15 days. They do reforms to the penalty legislation and crimes, right? Very complex crimes which are hard to prove. They're given, right, a penalty of 20 or more years. And the youth penalty law is reformed, right, for adolescents. And they're stated, right, that they're going to be processed through those types of crimes and be judged as adults. The strongest part of this whole process is not just the regime of exception, which was already on the third period, right? Meaning that we're on the fourth regimen of exceptions, but also the reforms that have been made, right, on the penalty code, which has generated this massive captures of thousands of individuals who don't necessarily fit gang members, right? The associations with which we work through and in Salvador, and where we're receiving cases, we've documented a significant amount of people. Salvador has over 2,000 crimes, right, cases of these. Up to now, we have 54 individuals who have died under the custody of the state, meaning that this conditional liberty right in these detention centers, these deaths have been produced both for beatings at the moment of capture, or beatings, tortures, inhumane treatments in these detention centers, as well as through a lack of medical attention, through not attending and not giving medicine to the individuals who have medical conditions, amongst other motives. So who are the individuals who are being detained? In general, they are young people, majority are men, more than 90% of them. So 90%, 10% are women. However, every month that this has been lengthening, this exception regime, this modality has been changing the way of capturing people and the characteristic of the criminals. So in these last 2 months, we've observed greater amount of captures from women, including of women older in age, who are being accused of being collaborators in this. So we're not just referring not to be gang members, right? And the way of capturing is the following: people who live in communities who have been stigmatized or who have been signaled to have high level of gang members, or also members where there has been a presence of gangs. They're also capturing people based on their physical characteristics, right? Based on where they live at, based on who is their family member, for example. So now they're capturing, if there's an individual who had bonds with gangs, they detain the entire family. And it's something quite serious, right? That they're bringing people away, taking people away from their place of employment, people who have informal employment, due to the fact that this has been allowed, right? This violation, meaning anonymous accusations. There's even been, right, this law of compensation, just like as in the war. People can call via telephone. They can denounce, right, a neighbor or any other person who's suspected of being a gang member. And since the justice system, right, serves to the means of the businessman, 99% of the individuals, right, remain detained. The first people thought that they weren't going to be detained, right, for the first 15 days, right? But we have 3 months of this regime exception. And after those first 15 days, all of the individuals, the judge does not even review their cases, because there are audiences of 500, 700 individuals where the fiscality only has the name of the individuals. They state that they're, members, bad people, or members of gangs, and that they represent a threat. So they have to go and serve 6-month sentence. And that's what the judges are serving, right? This is a very serious situation, full of stigmas, of great violations to human rights, and a situation that's very worrying, which is of course brought out through consequences, strong threat to defendants of human rights, to journalists who have exploited these issues, and news reporters who have exposed the government with criminal vinculations, right? So there has been studies from the United States that there's a clear negotiation right with the government of El Salvador with these things to decrease the homicides. So I'll leave it here. You've heard lots of me, and we're open to questions and comments from you all. Thank you. So thank you, Saida. So I would like, up till now, I think that Saida has given a pretty detailed panorama and something quite clear of what she's indicating, right? So we're talking now about 3 years of a government that's been presented as an alternative in front of the exhaust, the burnout of this fight that was going on politically. Like Saida mentioned, right? These new ideas don't come from just one party, or they don't present new ideas, right? At the end of the day, these patterns of conduct have been repeating themselves that 30 years ago were not seen in El Salvador, right? Especially with the massive amount of things that are happening in these contexts. However, these defendants of human rights in these last 30 years have been documenting a series of violations, right, towards individuals and means of poverty. For example, all of the arbitrarities committed by police, by the military, the executions, right, that have been committed by people, military. This has been happening. This massiveness of detention, these attacks on journalists and of defendants, this is something that we have not been seeing with the same aggressiveness and hostility that we've seen in the last 3 years. So I would like to refer specifically to this because inside this case, she was mentioning right at the end of her referment, right? These aggressions on individuals and journalists. I would like to talk about how this psychology, how the type of aggressions have been changing in the past few years. Because we need to situate this right from 2019 till now. In 2019, the speech from the current president and those politicians had to do with calling those organizations, civil organizations, human rights organizations, as financial organizations, from same as always, in referring to those political parties. And that mark, right, from that in Salvador, we documented that the type of aggressions that they were facing, those defendants and journalists, they were tied up to the type of work that they were doing, to the attacks of journalists due to the work that they were performing, like Saida mentioned, right? Due to investigations and due to their employment. There's a key characteristic which is important to highlight from 2019. In the first few weeks, right, of the current president, which was his speech, where he said, we're in front of a state and a representative of a state which reproduced, which naturalized and catalyzed this misogynistic speech, this patriarchal speech, not necessarily as how we see it, right, as a progressive government. This is the complete opposite. So we're going to see how in the market detentions, these massive detentions that are currently being performed, the derogatory and humiliating form in which mothers are being treated, wives, daughters of private individuals, right, who are being taken from their liberty. Because in El Salvador, right, women, we are 53% of the population, which means that any kind of phenomenon, any kind of social problem, whether it's violence or repression or increment, right, basic baskets, right, because this moment we are facing this great economical crisis, and this impacts disproportionately to women. So this moment we have this crisis of care, right? And we also need to add this to what happened to people from LGBTQ. People from LGBTQ, right? We generally have lived in our lives, in our bodies, the same thing that people started to experience worldwide in 2020 with the pandemic. The fear of going on the street, fear of being signaled, fear of being detained. This is something from the LGBT community who've been living for several times. So women, right, in the marks of this pandemic, we were not necessarily right in this safe space or in a space in which our lives and health were being guaranteed, right? All of this speech of trying to stay at home because the space, right, safe space, home, family was due to this fact that the state itself as a nation is the one that protects and has been explained right in this last few years. The state is the same thing that it is serves for several people from the LGBTQ community, right? Family is the first area of violence. And this is the same thing that's happening currently in El Salvador. This state which should provide the fundamental rights for citizenship. It's exactly the same state that's at this moment abusing of their rights for the majority. So I would like to continue in the same right, because by 2020, there's this change in the type of aggressions. And from there on out, we're not just referring to a misogynist speech, right, for women and journalists. By 2020, there starts to be, threats of sexual assaults, right, cyberbullying. There even starts to be this feelings of oppressions and coalitions by these people in uniforms. And this harassment of journalists is even more evident. After that, in 2021, we see this direct repercussion, right? Threats, intimidation, hacking of individuals, defendants, journalists, the militarization of public entities, which becomes something more evident. Then there's also, right, the criminalization of journalists. 2020, there's also this characteristic which reminds us to the decades of the 70s and 80s, right? So on the same day, in at least 3 organizations in which we received information, even though there were going to be these different organizations being accused of the same crimes. So always in these organizations that were tied to these parties. We see this characteristic there as well, right, from the police and the military to intimidate these organizations. So these findings happen in organizations such as Meridas, organizations such as the women's group, organizations such as Providas, all of this as well was tied to these attacks and violences in these digital spaces where they were already currently residing, right, as organizations. Lots of this also reproduced around these organizations. We've spoken with several of those individuals who've said we needed to remove our logos, our institutional logos from these vehicles, because what was happening is that we would enter an area and people would let us know, oh, you're from these organizations that are against the government. That's quite important as well, because progressively the speech from the government in front of the women, right, of these groups is that we're their enemies, right? We, the defendants of human rights, the organizations from civil rights, we're not in opposition, right? We're not acting or thinking, plotting against the government, right? It's the complete opposite of that. We're acting in favor of the citizenship and collaborating, contributing for the citizenship to have access to the fundamental rights that the state should be providing. So those same organizations at the regional state, right? They're the ones who are accompanying, right, those duties that the state should be assuming. So I think it's important to highlight that. In 2021, we also see this increase, right, in these hate crimes against, right, the LGBTQ community in El Salvador, right? This is some historical context, right? Femicide and the hate crimes against people from LGBTQ communities. This is something that's been present in Salvador, and until now, right, no government has been able to resolve this. Far away from that, they've closed out space that have been tied to the direct attention, or at least to the construction of public politics, thought to be able to advocate for this, right? Like the current government, right? And this current society which was also closed down. By 2022, which we're barely right in the first semester, and it already appears that we're right to the 2023, right? Due to the kind of burnout that we already have, we have found something that Sara mentioned, which are these arbitrary detentions, massive arbitrary detentions, which is important because here we're not just facing repercussions or specifically for organizations. We're also referring to massive detention, bad treatment, horrible, cruel treatment. And it's not enough for the state of El Salvador to present itself to the hearings, right? Last week, they did not arrive right in front of the CDA. This currently, this displays the ignorance that the state of El Salvador has and that the citizens have to endure. In which case, right, people with low resources in El Salvador who are having to perform extraordinary performances in order to pass all the legislative needs, right, to give rights to the families. A lot of these cases, right, require for women to leave their children alone at home or to travel with their children to long lines to receive, right, penalty deferments, right, to carry out with all these efforts, right, the bags, these kids for basic kits, right, basic hygienic kits for people like on liberty. Lots of these individuals tell us that they don't have any information about where their family members are being held. And clearly this is a violation by the standards of international human rights, because in any case, like Saida mentioned, these individuals have a right to know where their family members are being detained at, and the people in probation and liberty have the right to have a defense and a ready defense, right? And to know why they're being detained. The El Salvador government recognizes that there's a great percentage of margin of error in this detentions, but through the discovery of lots of organizations, this percentage is a lot higher than what the government's acknowledging, right? And this is something unfortunate, specifically because this is currently taking right to the fact that lots of the individuals who are being detained, they're leaders in these communities. These defendants have documented at least 6 cases of leaders in the communities under Bajo Lenta who have been detained in this specific department in this exception regime. They're individuals who don't have any kind of tie to crime, and even though, however, they are under the control of the state, and their families still don't have, the organizations that they form part of, they don't have any information about the state of their health or the state of their life. They don't even know in which conditions their current procedures are in, because no one provides information on that. That's something unfortunate and sad, and it's a return, right? Someone asked me a bit ago, how did I think the ecosystem for human rights in the region would be by 2050? Unfortunately, the idea is that we're going to barely be able to start healing some of those wounds that are unfortunately being reopened today, that we had barely started to heal, right, from those wounds from the 70s and 80s. So in 2022, unfortunately, in El Salvador, we're in this democratic going backwards, right, and also in human rights, and quite similar to what's going on in the United States, right, with this this action, right, of the Roe v. Wade, right. I think that we also assist to that, right, this social political context, right, worldwide, in which we're returning to this form, right, of a loss of rights, and they're taking today, right, power. Those who have this restrictive perspective, right, this perspective of violation of human rights. So that's why I think that's quite important, right, for us to have this dialogue space. I think here I'm going to be ending in order to have a conversation and hear from all of you as well, in whatever time we have left for this conversation.
Gabriela o Rebecca, no sé si han podido.
Gabriela, Rebecca, I don't know if you've been able to see if there are any questions on the chat. And if not, if someone would like to add a question to the chat, Zaira and Alejandra can answer to your questions or comments. Yes, if you wish to include questions on the chat, or if not, if you wish to turn on your camera and to give your question out loud, that'd be great as well.
Pues yo quisiera hacer una
Okay.
pregunta.
I would like to make a question. So, Zaira or Alejandra. Oh, Kathy, you froze. Kathy, perhaps to give the make your question, perhaps you could turn off your camera.
¿Quiénes son estas personas?
Kathy, creo que sería mejor
Kathy,
si
I think that would be best if you could turn off your camera in order to make your question out loud, because your screen is freezing. So is your audio.
¿Qué es lo que pasa cuando capturan a una persona? Y luego, sí, yo sé que
What happens when a person is captured? Kathy, are you still there with us?
regresamos.
Okay, muy
Okay,
bien.
we're back.
A ver,
Okay.
¿dónde está Zaira?
Okay, let's see where Zaira's at.
Okay. Zaira?
Kathy, can you please?
Okay, voy a hacer mi pregunta otra vez. Ya dice que ni ponen. Okay.
Can someone make my question again?
Sería útil.
I think that would be useful to give an example of what happens to an individual who's been captured, what happens with their family members, what do they have to endure and go through, what's the process look like? Okay, so I'm gonna provide an example of a capture of a man and of cases that we've heard of. For example, an individual, a family that was denounced through an internet account via Facebook. This was done through a troll account, right? So this ghost account. So this is stated that this was a family, a complaint of a family who sold, of rent. This individual, this woman who sold food, right, pupuyas, and her son is, you know, an entrepreneur. You know, he has this pizza shop. However, when the detention is made, they have not previously, right, investigated, right? So sorry, it's raining a lot here in Salvador, so I'm gonna close my window here. So give me a brief moment, please.
Muchas gracias. Quería invitar a María.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to invite Maria. I don't know if Maria's there from Nicaragua. Maria, do you wanna ask your question that you include in the chat? Turn on your camera and give your question. So I'm gonna continue this response. Okay. So I was explaining that this family was detained. The mother was detained. This older lady, over 60 years of age, her daughter, they asked her to go to her home. They checked everything. They checked that they didn't have any criminal precedents. They didn't have any affiliation to gangs. They took her to home and they detained her son and daughter, her daughter of 30 years and her son of 32 years. One of her children gives this public complaint and asks for support and goes to several organizations right from the civil society. And in this case, the brother disappears without knowing where they're being detained. Neither the brother, the mother, or the sister. Why? Because the authorities to this day, after 3 months of this this government, they have not implemented this system of information that can determine where a detained person has been taken to. They also don't know what jury is going to be presented with this case, right? So who's going to judge them? The brother is detained in Mariona. He's detained in Mariona and he was executed. He was assassinated there. So this individual, the brothers who are outside, they realize of their brother's murder because a funeral company went to their home to let them know that a body was a corpse was at the hospital and who they identified as their brother. So this individual, without any more information, goes and presents himself to legal medicine, and it took them like 4 days to recover the body. Their sister and mother, they're still detained without knowing the reasons or without having gone through a real process. When there were hearings, the brother is not present in those hearings. Like I explained, right, these are massive hearings of more than 500, more than 700 people, where the fiscal is only reading through the charges and the judge dictates, you know, provisional detention right for 6 months. The same occurs with the sister and the mother, and they're going to get detained. So what happens with the family, right? Both brothers, but in general, right, most cases, there are women who are left to care for the children of these detained individuals, right? So I mentioned previously, these entire families are being detained in lots of cases, if not more than half of those cases. Half of them are not members of gangs and they have not committed any crimes. They're working class people, and they are women who are going from penalty center, detention center after detention center, seeking their loved ones. So these detained who are disappeared because the state does not keep track of where they're located at. And these women, sisters, grandmas, aunts, are the ones caring for these children without any income, right? The state has also not established a mechanism to protect the children or to care for the elder population whose children have been the one who have been detained, such as this one. There are thousands of other stories that I could share with you. People with terminal diseases, and how Alejandra mentioned, they're the women, generally adult women or very young women who are having to carry this burden and who are seeking these family members due to these arbitrary detentions that have been produced. So thank you, Saida. It's very worrying what you're sharing, and it's a situation that no one should be experiencing, and it appears to be something quite serious. So Pablo, I don't know if you want to ask your question, you could turn on your camera and ask your question. If not, I can read it. So Pablo is joining from Chile. Okay. Okay. So Pablo Ruiz states, the international media does not share what you share with us. Why so much silence from the international press and community?
Bueno, yo creo que hay una labor, ¿verdad?
Well, I think that there's a labor that the current government is exercising from this hegemonic right speech. So the government of El Salvador, what it represents, right, Bukele and his power, right? It's this entire, right, like Sada mentioned, this entire agency of publicity, which goes and tests public opinions for every action that they take. So there's this control in the speech in the media communications, such as through national TV. There's also a coalition, right, from certain medias, right? Many of the medias in El Salvador, they live or have historically lived through the support that the government's been able to provide them with. At this moment, now several of them are blocked through lots of the work that they do, through the publicity that they previously had. There's also a lot of investment in publicity campaigns. There's even publicities right from the government that lasts up to 3 to 5 minutes, a campaign or a speech, even calling to give anonymous complaints. What Saida mentioned, right? There's a number that they've created, number 123, and there's this great amount of campaigns in order to give complaints, right? To denounce people. The speech that's been given is that the detentions that the government's been making are detentions of criminal groups. So it's not just dealing with a speech, a publicity speech, right? There's this construction of arguments that are even penetrating the society of El Salvador. As long as it's not happened to you, as long as it's not happened to people that you know of, the idea that's been constructed is an idea that that was previously mentioned, right? In other spaces, the conversations that we're in. They're at the beginning of this government, they're finding elements of this fascist government, right? But you need to see it in a different kind of way. It's not necessarily dealing with some fascist actions. Fascist is a government with practices of authoritarian that's exercising a totalitarian labor in the sense that it's homogenizing, right, the population, because the speech that's created is that the government is pursuing only the bad people, and those good people who are perhaps are there, that's a mistake, right? That's only 1% of those detainees. So this idea is pertaining, right, this thing that the only criminal members, gang members are being detained, right? But most of the people who are being detained are people who are innocent who do not participate in this. And in these hearings, multi-donor hearings, right, of 700 people, it's impossible for a judge to know of the probatory elements enough or the necessary documentation for these individuals to prove their innocence. And on top of that, you need to add, right, the control of all the institutions that the government has from the justice body, right? They also have this coercion from the judicial system. There are new judges who have recently been named who don't have neither the experience nor the necessary knowledge. They also don't have the conditions, even though they may want to exercise a fulfilled run justice or to study the facts, right? Because the series of controls have been exercised in terms of all of the things that have been going on. So if there's a control of the fiscality, control of the judicial body, a control of the legislation, if there's a control of the executive, then we're in front of this homogenous state, which is also exclusive. From there on out, right, the media communications are also right on the side of this homogenous speech. That's why it's important to have these kind of spaces to see this from a critical perspective and a perspective of human rights as well. Thank you, Alejandra. I don't know, there's other questions, but I wanted to give Karen, I don't know if you want me to read your question or if you want to ask it out loud, because it deals a lot with the previous question.
Grand Junction.
Okay, Karen from Grand Junction says, from the west side of Colorado, according to the online media Alfaro, the government bought access to Pegasus, which allows it to spy on the cell phones of journalists. The media is scared to complain about what is happening. So Karen's referring to the direct intimidation, which Alejandra and Saida have referred or mentioned previously. Yeah, perhaps I can try to answer two of the other questions on the chat. So I'll start this question related to Pegasus. So certainly this investigation is not just from Alfaro. It was also the Apple company is the one who complained and sent emails to the individuals whose accounts had been hacked or spied on. It was specifically, for example, the director of the organization where I worked at, Noabulo, was also detained. Journalists and defendants of human rights were persecuted on this, and individuals who've questioned the government. That intervention, and that was so through that, right, Pegasus was demonstrated, right, which is a spying method, which is only utilized by government. Which government would be interested, right, in persecuting and intercepting, right, phone calls or cell phone communications from people in Salvador? No one would want to do that more than the government of Salvador. So it's something that's been proven, but the government has simply disattended those callings, and that's why several of the functionaries from the several government appear to be in those paths, amongst other measures have been taken. And from there, I go to one of the questions: what measures can be taken from the neighboring countries, such as the United States, in order to denounce these kind of violations? That's something quite important for me. So I think that it's important, right? It's important to invite more people here, right? To invite the people, the United States, the American press, to cover these things, right? The news, the cover from these media communications, particularly in social media, is bought by the government. I mean, that's bought because they pay for these public spaces, publicity, right? People who have connections on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they see at every moment this the public space that are being bought by the government, right? They appear right on our screens, and that's information that affects, right, the people from El Salvador who live in the United States, and also individuals who are not from El Salvador. So that's why it's also important to release this information. Last week we had a hearing, right, with this coalition, and the state of El Salvador did not present in this hearing. It did not want to give accounts about this grave situation, to the violation of human rights that's currently happening, right, with this regime. And in other hearings that we've had, right, in front of international right bodies, about this persecutions of journalists, about people who have disappeared, about persecutions of defendants, about violations of women and gender violence. The state denies those situations. So that's why it's really important to transmit this information towards other areas. And when asking as well if it's true, or if the government now states that it has control of the gangs, and how truthful is that? The same Secretary of State from the United States declared this week, stating that this politics of this regime and the massive restriction of human rights in El Salvador is not sustainable, and that this will not result in the stop of crime, right? Specifically now, even though the government has over 40,000 people who are detained, and the government says that it's been over 70, right? It appears that the answer is, the goal is to detain over 70,000, right? But the violence and the impact that happens on the Salvador population does not resolve only, jailing these individuals for all these years, because they have taken not just the people in gangs, but thousands of innocent individuals and non-official information, because the government is not providing information. But these journalists have revealed that several of the people who have committed these crimes have already left the country. There's even a study from El Faro that reveals that the director of the detention centers took out one of the main gang members who's detained by the United States due to a homicide that was performed in that country. So it's important to know how the El Salvador government has negotiated with the gangs, and that this does not generate any kind of stability for compatriots, right? For brothers and sisters who are living through asylum in the United States. The situation is currently even worse because they live in persecution of these criminal structures and also in persecution by the state. I would also like to add that, well, in respect to all of the perspective, right, of immigrants in El Salvador, there's a lot more immigration, right, due to two reasons. The perspective, right, of the persecution in front of the youth, like Sada probably mentioned, right, those characteristics of individuals who are being detained are above all, right, young men, very similar to the phenomenon, right, of the 70s and 80s, which also, right, implicated, right, the massive migrations from El Salvador, and this continues to happen. And unfortunately, right, this truck, right, of 51 individuals that was found today, right, in the border in Mexico, in Texas, this gives, count, right, to the fact that this phenomenon continues occurring, and it's impossible, right, for states to be, complicit of these deaths, these massive deaths, and especially, due to this lack of faith, that's reaching youth. It's impossible to conceive that young women, youth, people with different sexual orientations, for children to have to live with this angst of having to see their family members being detained, of having to face, right, these home raids, because it's not the same, right, for them to go and knock, on the door of an individual, for them to ride with 10 or 15, heavily armed men in the middle of the night to take an individual, beat them, and take them from their home. That's what's happening in El Salvador. Saida mentioned, right? They sometimes take the entire families. So in front of this whole context of so much lack of hope, of violence, repression, of militarism, there's a context that's quite, hopeless. I think that there are some actions going to the future, actions of resiliency that are being performed by different organizations. I think that, for example, the work that organizations such as Crisosal, such as PAS, the organizations who are performing human rights actions, victims of these crimes. The state should be protecting these victims, and they're not doing it. So I think that the distribution of that information and companies in solidarity, in these fights, and informing through the media communications of the investigations that they're doing, right? This work right in Salvador. Lots of them are female journalists. There are media such as, Gatos Cerrados, mediums such as La Raca, mediums such as El Faro, who are doing this very important work of documenting, specifically in documenting, stories of lives of individuals who are detained. So I think you take that time to read about who are those individuals, the few stories that we were able to know of. Someday, right? The power is not eternal or infinite. Someday this government's going to have to face, in terms of the different instances of human rights violations, perhaps in front of the international human courts, right, for the crimes that they're committing. So that's why it's important to not stop documenting or disseminating this information, and any kind of solidarity action that you can take, so that for more people to dialogue about what's happening in Salvador. I know there's a lot of people from El Salvador who have believed, right, in this government, and who believed as well, based on this hopelessness that they faced from previous governments. But I think that the truth in front of all of us, and it can't be hidden for too much longer. So that's why I'm left with this hope, right, of these spaces of hearing, of of dialogue, because this also shows us that the international solidarity is something that's happened, that sustained us, and it will continue to sustain us. So there are still bits of hope, and I think that these dialogues are those bits of hopes in the middle of so many difficulties. So Gabriela, where are we at? Okay, so that's another question here from Moises, which states, what will be the mediums that you recommend in terms of veracity in order to be able to look for people? Okay, so I mentioned several of them. Gato Encerrado is one of them, which is investigating this. El Faro is another one. Laraca has also been releasing a lot of information. So we can pass a list later, and I did send a list of some literature about 2 or 3 hours ago. Some articles are found in English, some in Spanish, and we can go and add some more names as well. Okay, thank you, Kathy. Alejandra. I think that also connects with, I wanted to read a comment from Maria Hamlins, who's participating from Nicaragua. She says, thank you for your analysis and excellent recording. Hopefully we can share right with our colleagues in our Central American region and solidarity with the state of El Salvador. And I think that solidarity is something that we need to have, right? And we're gonna see, we're gonna give follow-up with the articles and everything to see in what capacity, what can we share in order to ensure, right, the security of people. I see that Moises has a question because he has his hand raised. Do you want to say something else, Moises? Hello? Or can you hear me?
Sí. Gracias.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I'm not Moises, I'm a friend of Moises who helped me, right, in sharing this, and I greatly thank him for inviting me to this. So I have a question, a very serious question, actually, which I'm constantly finding myself in a situation of not in having to confront, but sometimes having to talk with family members, friends, people. I live in Colorado, just to give you an example, and I'm an activist here, and I hold conversations with lots of individuals who are interested in finding out what's going on in El Salvador, who are interested in it. Unfortunately, how you mentioned there, right? Some of the information that the news that are being propagated around worldwide are those that offer some news that offer hope, and we're gonna have good things coming to El Salvador, and other things that are also working well. Personally, I consider myself to be a neutral party, but I do, I like to be, right, Cesar to Cesar, giving merits, right, to the government if it deserves it, but at the same time, right, trying to, judge it in the more just way, not just due to my principles, basis of my principles, but also due to other individuals who I respect. I've been able to see a bit of the advancement, right, of this abuse of power, which all of you have, in a very professional manner, have been able to display, and I thank you for that. I would also like to know, besides that, when will there be another opportunity for me to pass on this information to people that I see or who I hold these kind of conversations with? We're coming back to what I'm stating, right? I'm stating that in one way or another, I find myself in a situation where I need to discuss the shall we say, the typical kind of enthusiasm, which can't be, denied when you hear a news constantly, right? Not just of the positive things that happen in El Salvador. And remember this issue from maras and delinquency, right? This is something that we've lived we've already lived, very strongly, and that has left, very heavy wounds and marks for those of us who lived it, and those who, shall we say, who have suffered, through consequences, both from the past and the present, due to La Mara and all these things. So when the average Salvadorian hears that here in the United States, or another individual from another country hears the news, sometimes those sensational news, I'll be honest, they have nothing left to do but to admire what's happening, and with a just reason, right? Because we all hope to have, to live one of those moments in which, our countries can come and be cleaned up, and through a pure miracle, right, things start to look better, right? There's an end to corruption, and there's more progressive spaces start being held, right? And we start, living a life that's a bit, let's say, more according, right, to like human rights respects, and to progress, right, in all of those aspects that a society needs to advance, right, in order to grow in these newer times. Unfortunately, that's not always possible, and I find myself in a situation of sometimes having to explain about some of the things that have been performed or done by the government, which have not been very well, right, in terms of respect to power. You've divulged, right, something that's quite large, right, in terms of like how it is starting to explain those things. But it's quite difficult sometimes to enter, right, the minds of people. And there's like this phenomenon that's absurd, right, kind of like what's happened in this country, right, and then the right, from Donald Trump, for example, who has made lots of individuals, right, fanatics, to the point that the mere act of bringing a question that kind of goes against what they support or what they enjoy, they are immediately, labeled as enemy. That's already happened to me several times, right? Simply for asking logical questions, bringing logical questions to the table. So my question is, what do you recommend for me to do besides checking your information, right, in those instances that you share, but how to be able to see for this other Salvadorian who's also quite happy with what's been achieved and what's, promoted. So I'm gonna pass it over to Saida in order to answer. Sorry, because time's ending for us. So let's go with Saida. Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Okay, very briefly, and thank you for your question. I think that those are elements that are going to serve for all of us. We live in the same situation in El Salvador, and the nature of human beings is that we want to have immediate responses. When someone sells us an illusion alongside, strategies and publications, which has occurred from the United States all the way to Chile, right, in all of America and the entire world, where leaders or supposed leaders sell us an illusion, and this is tied up with this entire publicity strategy. They sell us a solution that they're gonna solve those grave problems, right? Serious problems. And also, we as individuals have a lot of touches of authoritarianism. We want effective and rapid strategies and responses, and we don't care, not because I say it, not generally, we don't care how that can be achieved, because we've grown up, we've received an education, right, quite authoritarian, right, and immediate and quite competitive, and that results in us being quite permeable to these false leaders, to these caudillos, right, these mirrors, leaders who sell themselves, right, as great saviors, right, like it's occurred in Latin America or in the United States. These are authoritarian leaders. How can we then deal with the good people, right? First of all, right, it's not about trusting or about convincing, right? It's about showing, displaying, right, evidence, and those concrete evidence. and also about informing. So this is something cyclical in our societies, and due to that, it's important, right, for these forums to have, to be documented forums, to be spaces with information, and that's why it's necessary to go even beyond the publicity. So that's why I was referencing to how in social medias and constant information here in El Salvador, for example, the cable channels, they're all filled of propaganda and publicities, and that's permeated right in the minds of people. And that's why the population, even though it recognizes, first of all, the population, most of all, don't know what the Constitution states, but those who recognize that the re-election is not possible constitutionally, they applaud that the fact that the president is going to be, re-elected because he's been God sent, and that's marvelous, right? So that's a narrative that's constructed through, the support of people from Venezuela, for example, and it's necessary to be building those blocks, through the communication, and that's a task that all of us here present need to have in order to accompany the victims of human rights violations, and also to rescue our countries from authoritarianism, and to return or to retake these small advancements that we'd had in terms of democratic processes. Thank you, Saida. For those of you who can read in English, right, I'm going to read those comments from Carmen. It says, unfortunately, in El Salvador, there's a lack of educational process that allow for the population to have critical thinking. She also mentioned that they can analyze the situations, the actions, and the system, which I think is quite important to state. Okay, so you presented us with a lot of critical information, very worrying, but knowing that need to be in solidarity and not just in talking and listening from each other, but also in taking action. And in action, you are the ones who can direct us to let us know what else we can do. But now it's time, right, for us to end with this very important conversation. I wanted to check first if Saida or Alejandra, if they wish to say or share something else in order to resume. Or we're also going to be sharing that document that Jordan shared the link with in order to share some of these other critical points that have been presented to us. So Alejandra, Saida, I wanted to pass, the last few words over to you who are letting us know of this very worrying reality of the lack of human rights and impunity that is once again occurring, and even higher level now in El Salvador at this moment. Well, I wanted to add myself right to this slide thing that Saida, planted. It's not about convincing anyone, right? Because it's not that there's two sides, right, in this story. But truthfully, what we do from the point of view of organizations who defend human rights, we're on the side of those who are most in need of. So if the state were to be doing its work, if the state were to be fulfilling their responsibility, and so we say encompassed, right, by their voters, the people who elect them, well, then the work from public defendants, would be less tiring, right, and less angst, right? So that reminder, I think, right, of what those defendants of human rights, those activists, the work that we do has to deal with that, right? And constructing, building, hope in the middle of hopelessness. So I do think that it's quite important to continue cultivating these, these conversations and dialogues that you can also perpetuate, right? And basis, right, of information, like Saida previously mentioned, and in these constructed arguments based on this concrete reality, and not just based on speeches, right? But it's not just dealing with emotions, right, or political ideology. This deals, right, with this ethic perspective and human rights perspective, with these aspects that impact most people. And in front of that, right, you can take an action based on the defendants of human rights organizations. So we just want to invite you to continue, helping us disseminate this information. if there are cases that, reach your labs and your knowledge of people who are perhaps seeking, refugee, asylum, or to fleeing violence in El Salvador, for you to be able to document, write that down, to contact us, through Katia. Crystal Sal, has been releasing monthly reports on this from our web of contacts, right? We're also going to be releasing next month, right, through all these foundations and organizations for the Foundation Fund, which is an organization, right, for human rights. We're going to release a specific form report, right, about attacks, right, on journalists for the years 2021, 2022. So we also want to invite you, to disseminate and to share out this information that we're all documenting. Yeah, well, I wanted to thank you for providing me with this opportunity to be able to share with you all the reality of El Salvador. Thanking you with solidarity, the solidarity of the entire life, right, with all of our brothers and sisters, and to ask you to continue, right, in this support effort for the people of El Salvador who are currently residing in the United States, who are hoping to find a new way of life. I also invite you to read, our reports. You can go to the website of Crystal Sal. They're found in Spanish, but they're also available in English so that you can read and revise them. Some are quite amplified, right? But there are these executive reports. So I invite you, right, to inform yourselves, to enter, right, the websites of the organizationals of the civil society, where there's a lot of information, provided about the situation currently facing El Salvador. Thank you so much for your solidarity, and good evening. So thank you so much. Strong applause and solidarity for all of you. And also quickly, wanted to thank, the Community Language Cooperative for the interpretation services to sustain this bilingual space. So thank you for that. And we're going to give follow-up to the document, which I know was shared, to pass it on to all of you. Saida, Alejandra, we know that sharing all of this with the reality that you're facing there is not easy. And we greatly appreciate your strength, your courage, your perspective of ensuring that the reality faces, the light of day to, improve the future. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for the region support in Northern Colorado, and the Committee of Peace and Justice from Denver, and part of AFSC. Good evening. And we continue in this battle together, and si se puede, you can. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Good evening.